Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I sit on the edge of our bed, staring out the window. The coffee in my hand is cold. I can see the outline of where her suitcase used to sit on the hardwood floor. She's in Hawaii. Work, she said. Another trip. It used to be easier to believe her. Now, not so much. There's a faint trace of her perfume in the room, sweet and floral, but it feels more like the smell of rot. Everything looks the same, but it's not. Something is off. I can't shake the feeling anymore. It's been creeping up on me for weeks, months even. This quiet dread that whispers to me in the stillness. I take a sip of the bitter coffee, barely tasting it, then set the cup down. The silence feels heavy, suffocating. It's not the kind of silence you get used to, like the quiet of early mornings before the world wakes up. No, this is different. This is the kind of silence that fills a room with secrets, the kind that presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe. I glance at my phone. Still nothing. Jennifer hasn't texted since last night. Usually she sends me a quick good morning when she's away, just something to keep up appearances. But now, nothing. I tell myself it's fine, that she's probably busy. But deep down, I know that's a lie. The silence speaks louder than anything she could have said. I get dressed, forcing myself to focus on the day ahead. Work, meetings, the same routine I've been following for years. I leave the house, lock the door behind me, and walk toward the car. The day starts like any other, mundane, predictable. But underneath, I can feel the cracks in my life widening. At the office, I sit through meetings, nodding in all the right places, but my mind keeps drifting back to Jennifer. I can't shake the nagging thought that something is wrong. The pauses in our recent conversations, the way she's been distant, detached. She used to call every night when she traveled. Now, I'm lucky if I get a text. It's like she's slipping away, and I'm left standing here watching her disappear. I grab lunch with an old friend, Mark, someone I've known since college. We sit at a corner booth in a small diner, the kind that hasn't changed in decades. He talks about work, his wife, his kids, but I barely hear him. My mind is elsewhere. He doesn't notice. No one notices anymore. I've become background noise, the guy people glance at but don't really see. "You good, man?" Mark asks, his voice cutting through my haze. "Yeah," I lie. "Just tired." He nods, not pushing it. We finish lunch, and I head back to the office, but I can't focus. The minutes drag by, each one heavier than the last. When I get home that evening, the house feels emptier than it did this morning. I pour myself a glass of whiskey and sit in the living room, the silence wrapping itself around me like a noose. I check my phone again. Still nothing. I scroll through old messages between Jennifer and me, rereading them, searching for clues, something I might have missed. But it's all there. The slow unraveling of us. The messages used to be longer, warmer. Now, they're just words, flat and distant. I tell myself not to jump to conclusions, not to overreact. But the doubt is there, gnawing at me like a parasite. The next day, I pick up the dry cleaning and head to work like usual. I try to lose myself in the rhythm of the day, but even work doesn't give me the escape it used to. I can't stop thinking about her, about us. I remember when things were different, when we were different. Back when I could still make her laugh, back when I didn't have to wonder if she was lying to me. That night, I sit in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind won't shut off. I think about the way she used to curl up next to me, her head resting on my chest. Now the bed feels too big, too empty. She's thousands of miles away, but it feels like she's already gone. I grab my phone, check her social media. Nothing new, no posts, no updates. She used to be so active, sharing photos from her trips, little snippets of her day. But now, silence. I scroll through her older posts, stopping on a picture of her in Hawaii from a few months ago. She's smiling, but it feels forced. Or maybe that's just me projecting. I can't tell anymore. Her credit card statements sit on the kitchen counter. I know I shouldn't look, but I do. It's not just the hotels and restaurants that catch my eye, but the odd charges, gifts I never received, dinners at places we've never been together. The unease builds. It's subtle at first, like a small itch at the back of my mind, but it grows, festers. There's no concrete proof, nothing I can point to and say, this is it, but I feel it. I feel her slipping away, bit by bit, every day. She hasn't been herself for a while now. The late-night work trips, the business calls that she always steps out of the room to take. I try to rationalize it, try to convince myself I'm just being paranoid, but the gut feeling won't go away. It's like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way beneath me. It's Wednesday when I get a brief text from her. Busy day, sorry for not calling. I'll check in tomorrow. That's it. No explanation, no details. Just an apology and a promise she won't keep. I don't respond. I can't. What would I even say? The next few days blur together. I go through the motions, work, sleep, repeat. But the tension keeps building, tightening around my chest like a vice. It's in the little things. The way people at work cut me off mid-sentence. The way Mark doesn't even ask how I'm doing anymore. I'm starting to feel invisible. Everyone else moves on with their lives, while mine is stuck in this endless loop of doubt and suspicion. On Friday night, after a particularly long day, I find myself staring at her side of the bed again. The emptiness gnaws at me. I pour another glass of whiskey, sit by the window, and watch the streetlights flicker outside. I can't remember the last time we felt like a couple. The last time I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. I take a deep breath, trying to push the thoughts away, but they won't leave. They cling to me, whispering in the back of my mind, louder and louder. I glance at my phone again, half expecting a message, half dreading it. Nothing. The days pass and still, she doesn't call. Just a few meaningless texts, cold and distant, like she's going through the motions of keeping me in the dark. I try not to let it get to me, but I'm lying to myself. The doubt is there, festering like an open wound. I start second-guessing everything. The way she said goodbye before she left. The awkward pauses during her last phone call. Was it guilt or something worse? Then one night, I wake up to an empty house. The cold side of the bed taunts me. I sit up, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Her suitcase is still gone, her clothes absent from the closet. But it's more than that. The silence is louder now. It's no longer just a feeling, it's a truth I can't ignore. I walk downstairs, pour another drink, and sit by the window. The whiskey burns as it goes down, but it doesn't numb the growing dread inside me. I stare at my reflection in the glass, the faint outline of a man I barely recognize anymore. The unease has become something darker, something heavier. I can't tell if it's paranoia or if I've just been too blind to see what's right in front of me. I set the glass down and close my eyes, but sleep doesn't come. Instead, my mind races, replaying every conversation, every glance, every moment where things felt off. I want to believe it's all in my head, that I'm imagining it, but I know deep down that I've been blind for too long. I've been a fool, and the more I think about it, the more I realize I've only been delaying the inevitable. She's gone, even if she doesn't know it yet. And when she comes back, when she walks through that door, I'll be ready to take back what's mine. Jennifer and I had been married for 8 years, but looking back, it feels like a lifetime. We were good once, passionate, alive, the kind of couple that made people sick with how happy we looked. But all of that had become a distant memory, a shadow of something I barely recognize now. Lately, she felt more like a stranger who shared my house, my bed, and nothing else. It didn't happen overnight. The change came slowly, creeping in like the slow rot that goes unnoticed until the foundation starts to crumble. We fell into a routine, a comfortable, dead routine. Conversations became shorter, filled with obligatory questions about how the day went, plans for the weekend. There was no depth to them anymore, no real connection. It was all surface level, like we were going through the motions of being married without actually being married. The sex had stopped months ago. I'd told myself it was just a rough patch, that we'd get through it like we always did. But that wasn't the truth, was it? No, the truth was that she was already gone. She just hadn't told me yet. I had been blind, clinging to the idea of us, refusing to see the cracks that had been there all along. Lying in bed at night, I would stare at the ceiling, listening to her breathing next to me, so close yet so far away. Sometimes I'd reach out, almost touch her, but then I'd stop myself. The distance between us was too much. It wasn't physical. It was emotional. She wasn't mine anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening. But the signs were everywhere. She'd become secretive about her phone, locking it constantly. At night, she'd take it into the bathroom, staying in there for what felt like hours. When she'd finally come out, her face would be unreadable, like a mask, and she'd slip into bed without a word, without a glance in my direction. Her business trips had become more frequent, too. I used to believe her when she said she was going for work. But now, it felt like an excuse, a way to get away from me, from us. And I let her. I let her go without question because I was too afraid of what I might find if I looked too closely. But there were things I couldn't ignore. The late-night texts she thought I didn't notice, the way she smiled at her phone, a smile she hadn't given me in months, the hushed phone calls she took in the other room, the expensive gifts on her credit card that I never received. They all added up, and I knew. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to admit it. Admitting it would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. The more I thought about it, the more everything started to make sense. She had been distant for longer than I realized. Our intimacy, the way she used to look at me like I was the only man in the world, had been gone for a while. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that she was stressed or tired, but now I saw it for what it was, a slow, deliberate withdrawal from our life together. I spent hours, days, replaying every moment over the past year in my head. Every conversation, every time she had been late coming home, every vague excuse she'd given about working late or going out with friends. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, and the picture they painted was one I didn't want to see. One night, after too many drinks, I decided to look through her desk. I had never done that before. We had always trusted each other, or at least I thought we had. But that trust was a lie, just like everything else in our marriage. My hands shook as I opened the drawer, my stomach twisted in knots. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe I was hoping I wouldn't find anything at all, that I was just paranoid, and this was all in my head. At first, there was nothing, just paperwork, bills, the usual clutter you'd expect to find. But then, buried beneath a stack of old documents, I found it. A small, worn envelope with a name I didn't recognize. Brandon. My heart stopped. I knew even before I opened it what I was about to find. The letter inside was short, but it was enough. It was everything. His words were tender, intimate, the kind of words that had once been meant for me, the kind of words a man writes to a woman he loves, to a woman who loves him back. And there it was, in black and white, proof. Proof that she had been lying to me, proof that she had been betraying me. My hands trembled as I read the words over and over, my vision blurring as the weight of her betrayal hit me like a freight train. Hawaii wasn't a business trip, it was a romantic getaway, with him. While I sat here, alone, wondering where my wife was, she was laughing with him, touching him, using my money to pay for their little vacation. I sat there for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like the air had been sucked out of the room. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to my face, kissed me goodbye, and then run off to be with him? I wanted to scream, to break something, to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But all I could do was sit there, numb. The anger came later. Slowly at first, but then it consumed me, burning through me like wildfire. I wasn't just angry, I was furious. Furious at her for what she had done, for how easily she had deceived me. But more than that, I was furious at myself. For trusting her, for not seeing the signs, for being so blind, so stupid. I should have confronted her then and there. I should have called her, screamed at her, demanded answers, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there in the dark, the letter clutched in my hand, and I waited. I waited for the anger to pass, for the rage to subside, but it didn't. It just kept building, higher and higher, until I felt like I was going to explode. When I finally stood up, my decision was made. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. No, I was going to hurt her in a way she wouldn't see coming. I was going to take back what was mine. Every penny, every piece of the life we built together. I would strip it all away, leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the taste of her own betrayal. I set the letter back in the drawer, exactly where I found it, and closed it. I needed her to stay in the dark a little longer. Let her think she's safe, that her secrets are still buried. Let her keep lying, because when the truth finally hits her, it'll be too late. And that's how I wanted it. I walked downstairs, poured myself another drink, and sat by the window, staring out into the night. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it wasn't enough to numb the pain. Nothing would be enough for that. The betrayal was too deep, too raw, but I wasn't going to drown in it. I wasn't going to let it break me. No, I was going to use it. I was going to turn it into something sharper, something deadly. I thought about Jennifer, thousands of miles away, probably wrapped in another man's arms, laughing, while I sat here, plotting her downfall. The anger surged again, but this time, it was cold, calculated. I was done being the fool, done playing the role of the trusting husband, the man who turns a blind eye. I wasn't blind anymore. In the morning, I went to the bank. It was easy, too easy to start moving things around. She never paid attention to our accounts, never bothered with the details. That was my job. And now, it would be her undoing. One by one, I drained the accounts she didn't even know existed, transferred the money into my own name. The house, the cars, everything was under my control. And by the time she came back, it would all be gone. It felt good, taking control, regaining some sense of power in a situation where I had felt so powerless. It felt good to know that she would come home to nothing, that when she walked through that door, she'd be blindsided. I imagined the look on her face, the shock, the panic, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. That night, I went through her things again. This time, I didn't care if I got caught. I needed more proof, more fuel for the fire. I found her laptop, logged in without hesitation, and there it was. Emails, messages, pictures, all of it. The proof of her affair laid out in front of me like a neatly wrapped gift. It was worse than I imagined. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. And Hawaii wasn't just a getaway. It was the start of something more, something permanent. She was leaving me. That much was clear. She just hadn't bothered to tell me yet, but she wouldn't get the chance. By the time she came back, there'd be nothing left for her to leave. I would make sure of it. I would burn it all down, and I'd enjoy every second of watching her life crumble the way she'd crumbled mine. By the time I closed the laptop, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just cold, hard clarity. This wasn't about love or betrayal anymore. This was about survival. This was about taking back control, and that's exactly what I was going to do. When she walked through that door, everything would be different. The house she thought was hers, gone. The money she thought she could live off of, gone. The life we had built together, burned to ashes. I drained the last of my whiskey and stared out into the dark, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Everything had changed now. Everything was different. There was no going back, no fixing what was broken. And I didn't want to fix it anymore. I wanted to watch it burn, and I would. I didn't confront her, not yet. I wasn't ready for that. The shock, the tears, the inevitable lies spilling out of her mouth. No, that would be too easy, too predictable. Jennifer thought she had me wrapped around her finger, thought I'd be the same quiet, oblivious husband I'd been for years. But that version of me was dead. The man who sat quietly, who trusted, who believed, that man had been ripped apart the moment I read Brandon's letter. Every decision I made from that point forward was cold, calculated. I went through the motions as though everything was normal, smiling when I had to, playing my part. But inside, I was mapping out every step. Every word I said to her, every look I gave, it was all part of the plan. The plan to make sure she didn't see it coming. When she called from Hawaii the next day, I answered the phone as if nothing had changed, as if I wasn't sitting there, her lover's words still burning in my mind. I could hear the background noise, the faint sound of waves crashing against the shore. She laughed, a carefree sound that made my skin crawl. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "How's everything back home?" I played along. "It's fine, just busy with work." There was a pause. She didn't bother asking for details. She didn't care. She was already somewhere else, her mind thousands of miles away with him. I could picture them lying on a beach, his hand tracing the line of her body the way mine once did. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "I miss you," she said, a half-hearted sentiment that fell flat. She didn't mean it, and I didn't respond. I kept the conversation brief, detached. The sooner I got off the phone, the better. I couldn't stomach the sound of her voice anymore, the lies buried underneath each word. But I didn't let on. I couldn't, not yet. I hung up, my mind already turning toward the next move. She'd be back in 3 days. I had 3 days to tear down the life we'd built, to dismantle everything she thought was secure, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for her to return to. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about control, taking it back, reclaiming what was mine. Jennifer thought she could leave me with nothing, but I'd be the one to leave her hollow. The first step was easy. The bank accounts were all under my control. Joint accounts that, until now, she hadn't bothered to question. I logged in from my laptop that night, shifting funds into an account she didn't know existed, one in my name only. With a few clicks, thousands of dollars disappeared from her reach. Next came the house. Our beautiful home, the one she used to tell everyone she adored, the one she bragged about to her friends, was the centerpiece of our life together. But it was just a house, just walls and furniture. I'd sold it before she even knew what was happening. I found a buyer the next morning, someone eager to close quickly, someone who wouldn't ask questions. I didn't care about the price. I cared about the speed. The papers were signed within 24 hours. The house was gone. I looked around at the empty rooms, the echoes of our life together bouncing off the walls. There wasn't even time to feel sentimental. Everything we had shared in this space had been tainted, twisted by her betrayal. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, running my hand over countertops we had once argued about while renovating. None of it mattered now. I packed my things, just the essentials, leaving behind everything that was hers. Her clothes, her jewelry, the little trinkets she loved to display around the house. I left them like ghostly reminders of the woman she used to be, the woman she pretended to be. When she came back, she'd find the shell of our life, but the core of it, what she needed, would be gone. Just like her love for me had vanished long ago. By the time Friday rolled around, I had nearly emptied our savings, sold the house, and liquidated everything else. The cars were the last to go. Hers, the sleek BMW she adored, was the first on the chopping block. I handed the keys over to a broker that afternoon, knowing she'd never see it again. As I watched the car pull away, I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, just a cold satisfaction. She'd made her choice when she chose him. This was just the consequence. She was still in Hawaii, soaking up the sun while I dismantled everything she thought she could come home to. Every hour, every minute, brought me closer to the moment when her world would collapse. It was around noon when the phone rang. I expected it to be a work call, maybe someone asking for last-minute advice on a deal. Instead, the voice on the other end took me by surprise. "Mr. Harding?" It was low, professional. I almost didn't recognize it. "Speaking," I said, leaning back in my chair. "This is Daniel Greaves. You hired me a few months ago." Greaves, the private investigator. I'd almost forgotten about him. Back when the first suspicions crept in, when Jennifer started acting distant, I had hired him to keep tabs on her. He hadn't turned up much then, just a few strange interactions, some missed details. I'd let it go, chalked it up to paranoia. But now, I've got something for you, Greaves said, his voice carrying the weight of bad news. It's about your wife. Yeah, I muttered. I already know about her affair. That's not the whole story, Greaves replied. There was a pause, a tension building. Her lover, Brandon, he's not who she thinks he is. What do you mean? Greaves cleared his throat. Brandon's a con artist. He's been running scams on women for years, women like your wife. He finds them, woos them, takes them for everything they're worth, and then vanishes. My grip on the phone tightened. You're telling me Jennifer is being played too? That's right. I've been digging into his past. He's got a history of this. 3 other women, all of them left bankrupt and heartbroken when he disappeared. I don't know if your wife's aware, but she's not the only victim. I stared out the window, letting the words sink in. Jennifer wasn't just cheating on me, she was being used. She thought she was escaping with him, leaving me behind for something better, but she was just another mark in his game, another woman he'd discard when he was done. Thanks, Greaves, I said, my mind racing. I'll take it from here. I hung up, the reality of the situation settling over me like a heavy fog. I should have felt something, maybe a twisted sense of satisfaction, knowing that she was getting played, that she was as much of a fool as I had been. But all I felt was a deeper, darker anger. Not just at her, but at him. Brandon, the man who thought he could take everything from me and from her. I wasn't going to let that happen. Suddenly, my plan shifted. This wasn't just about stripping Jennifer of everything anymore. It wasn't just about leaving her with nothing. Now, it was about something more. I wasn't going to let Brandon finish what he started. He didn't get to walk away clean. He didn't get to ruin her life. That was my job. I spent the next few hours revising my plan. It had to be perfect, precise. I wasn't just going to take everything away from Jennifer. I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of her choices, the betrayal, the humiliation. But I wouldn't let Brandon get off easy either. I needed to find him, expose him, make sure he knew who he was dealing with. Jennifer would come home to a nightmare. But when it all crumbled, it wouldn't be because of him. It would be because of me. I went through everything again, the bank accounts, the sales, every asset that once belonged to both of us. But this time, I left just enough in place, a lifeline, a sliver of hope. Something to make her think she could still claw her way back. And when she reached for it, I'd be the one to pull it away. By the time I was done, everything was set. The house would be gone, the money out of reach. Her precious car, the jewelry, all of it, sold. But I left the bare minimum in our joint account, enough for her to think she could survive, to believe she had a way out. I wanted to watch her grasp for control, only to realize it was already too late. I could picture her now standing on that beach, Brandon by her side, both of them oblivious to the storm headed their way. By the time she stepped off that plane, everything she thought she could rely on would be gone. Her lover, her life, her security, it would all vanish. But she wouldn't be left completely alone. No, I wanted her to know exactly who did this to her. When the dust settled, when she had no one else to turn to, I'd still be there watching, waiting, reminding her of the choice she made when she betrayed me. Jennifer thought she could leave me with nothing. But when this was over, she'd be the one with nothing. She didn't know what hit her. Jennifer arrived home on a warm Sunday evening, the kind of quiet suburban day she'd expect to end with me on the couch, maybe a glass of wine waiting for her. But when she pulled up to the curb, there was no house. Not our house, anyway. Instead, a moving truck was parked out front, and unfamiliar faces bustled in and out with boxes. I watched from a distance, just far enough to see her, but close enough to relish every second of confusion, every flicker of panic that rippled across her face. She stepped out of the taxi, her bag still tagged from the Hawaiian airport, and stood frozen, staring at what had once been hers. A man with a clipboard approached her, probably the new owner or someone hired to help with the move. I couldn't hear the words exchanged, but I could see it. The moment it sank in. The house was gone, sold to strangers. She looked around, her eyes darting up and down the street as if I'd magically appear, as if I'd be standing there with some explanation, some story, to make it all go away. But I wasn't there to comfort her. I was there to watch her unravel. Her phone was out in a heartbeat, her fingers moving rapidly over the screen. I imagined the panic, the realization setting in as she tried to check the bank accounts, only to find them drained. As the reality hit her, her hands started to tremble, the same way mine had when I'd first read Brandon's letter. Good. I didn't answer her first call, or the second. By the time the third rang through, I picked up, my voice calm, detached. She sounded frantic, breathless. Where are you? What the hell is going on? She demanded, her voice shrill, almost hysterical. I let the silence drag out for a beat longer than necessary. Let her sweat. It's gone, Jennifer, I said, my voice so calm it almost sounded indifferent. The house, the money, the cars, all of it. Gone. What do you mean, gone? She spat, disbelief coloring every word. This is my house. Where's my car? What did you do, you son of a... You think you can play me? I cut her off, my tone hardening. You think you can use me to fund your little vacation with Brandon, laugh at me behind my back, and come home like nothing happened? Her breathing hitched. That was when she knew. You didn't think I'd find out, did you? I continued. The texts, the letters, the trips, you didn't even bother hiding it. How long, Jennifer? How long have you been planning to leave me? But let me guess, you were going to keep me around just long enough to make sure you had everything you needed before you ran off into the sunset with your lover, right? Her voice cracked when she responded, but I wasn't sure if it was from fear or guilt. It wasn't like that, please. Don't lie to me, I snapped. You're not the victim here. You made your choice. The silence on the line stretched out, her breath shaky on the other end. I almost felt her mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened, trying to figure out how the ground had been ripped out from under her. I left you something, I said, my voice turning cold again. A few thousand in our joint account. Consider it a gift. You can start over with that. Brandon can help you. Her next words came out broken, almost pleading. I don't even know where Brandon is. He's not answering my calls. He left me. I closed my eyes, letting the satisfaction settle in. So he'd done it. Brandon had cut her loose too, just as I expected. I had made sure of that, tipping off a couple of his other victims about his whereabouts. By now, he'd be too busy covering his tracks to bother with her. Jennifer was alone, without him, without me, without anyone. Exactly where she deserved to be. I kept my voice flat. That's not my problem anymore. Please, you don't understand. I didn't mean for this to happen. You didn't mean for me to find out, I corrected, cutting her off again. That's all you didn't mean. Don't insult me by pretending you didn't know exactly what you were doing. She started to sob, the sound jagged and desperate. I let it wash over me, but it didn't stir anything. Not pity, not remorse. I wasn't the man she used to control. I wasn't that broken shell of a husband who sat by while she drained the life out of our marriage. I trusted you, Jennifer, I said quietly, venom in every syllable. And you used me. You lied to my face every single day. Her voice was barely a whisper now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't respond right away, just let her words hang there in the silence, meaningless. Maybe part of her believed an apology would fix things, that somehow her saying sorry would make it all go away. But I was past forgiveness. I was past everything. I'm done, Jennifer, I said finally. It's over. No, please, she sobbed. You can't do this to me. You can't just leave me with nothing. But I already had. I hung up, leaving her with the echo of a deadline, the sound of finality. I imagined her standing there on the sidewalk, clutching her phone, staring at the house that no longer belonged to her. The realization of how thoroughly she'd lost would hit soon enough. She was abandoned. By Brandon, by me, by everything she thought she controlled. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping my phone, letting the adrenaline drain from my system. I thought it would feel like victory. I thought there'd be a surge of triumph, of justice. But all I felt was quiet. A cold, eerie silence inside me, as though I had hollowed out something important, something vital. I drove past the house one last time, staying far enough away that she wouldn't see me. She was still there, standing in front of the moving truck, talking to one of the movers, her face pale and stricken. She looked like a woman trying to wake up from a nightmare, trying to force reality to shift back to something she could handle. But she couldn't handle this, not anymore. As I watched her, I realized something that hit deeper than I expected. I was free, truly free. But in my freedom, there was a strange sense of loss, not of her. No, I didn't miss Jennifer. I didn't miss the woman who betrayed me. I missed the man I used to be, the one who hadn't been broken by her betrayal, the one who believed in trust and love and marriage. That man was gone now, sold off along with the house, the cars, and the life we'd built together. I pulled away from the street, not looking back. Jennifer was left with nothing, just as I promised. But in taking everything from her, I'd taken more from myself than I realized. Later that night, as I sat alone in the small motel room I'd rented under a different name, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The way her voice had cracked, the sound of her begging for something I'd already stripped away, the control, the power. For so long she had controlled our narrative, but now the story was mine. I had written the final chapter. She was out of my life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the end wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. Something in me had shifted during this process. I thought I'd feel peace, but instead, there was an emptiness, a hollowness that spread through me like a shadow. Revenge had tasted sweet, but now that the sweetness had passed, I was left with the bitterness of it. There was no going back, not for me, not for her. Jennifer would rebuild. She'd have no choice. Maybe she'd even find another man, someone she could fool again, but it wouldn't be me. I had disappeared from her life, just as she had disappeared from mine. There was nothing left tying us together anymore. I stared at the ceiling of the motel room, my hands resting on my chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of my heart. I had done what I set out to do. I had destroyed her, and in the process, I destroyed the remnants of what we once had. Tomorrow, I'd leave town, start somewhere new, somewhere far away from here, from her, from everything that reminded me of the life I used to have. And maybe, in time, I'd feel something again, something real. But tonight, all I felt was the cold weight of victory and the ashes it left behind. The aftermath of what I'd done spread out before me like a slow-motion car crash. There was no immediate chaos, no dramatic explosion, just the steady, inevitable destruction of Jennifer's life. I kept my distance, watching from the shadows as everything she'd built, every false security she'd clung to, came crashing down. It didn't happen overnight. It started small, the way these things do, with whispers at her office when she couldn't make rent and started falling behind on payments. The credit cards I hadn't touched were maxed out within a week of her return. Friends began avoiding her calls. Some of them had probably heard about what happened with Brandon, maybe even through me. I'd planted the seeds where I could, tipped off the right people about his scams. Her reputation unraveled next. It wasn't just the financial collapse that did it, although that was a big part of it, but the way the cracks in her personal life started showing at work. You could hide a lot behind a smile, but only for so long. I imagined her there, sitting in meetings, her mind somewhere else entirely as her world continued to shrink around her. A month passed. The house sold. The money gone. The BMW, a distant memory. She moved into some rundown apartment in the part of town we used to laugh about when we drove past, mocking the people who had let their lives fall apart like that. Now she was one of them, barely scraping by. I'd heard she lost her job 2 weeks in, showing up late too often, her excuses running thin. One day, she just didn't show up at all. After that, they stopped calling her back. It was strange how little satisfaction I felt watching it unfold. I thought I'd relish the slow-motion destruction, that I'd savor every moment of her collapse. And for a while, I did. The power was intoxicating, knowing I'd orchestrated this, knowing she was suffering because of me. But it faded, quicker than I thought it would, leaving behind something else. Something darker. I told myself I wasn't responsible for the way she crumbled. Not really. Brandon had done his damage too. I'd just been the one to finish it. But that didn't stop the gnawing emptiness from creeping in at the edges of my thoughts. There was a part of me that wanted her to get back up, to fight. Maybe if she did, if she managed to rebuild her life, I could still justify what I'd done as a necessary evil, a lesson. But Jennifer didn't fight. She spiraled deeper, her desperation growing more visible with each passing day. A mutual friend, one of the few who still tolerated her, texted me one night, said Jennifer had been seen at some bar downtown, drunk out of her mind, begging strangers for a ride home. I read the message and put my phone down, ignoring the flood of emotions that surged through me. I wasn't responsible for her anymore. I reminded myself of that. She'd made her choices, but the next time I saw her, I barely recognized her. I'd been doing my best to avoid crossing paths, but it was a small town, and eventually our lives collided again. It was in a grocery store of all places, a mundane encounter that felt loaded with significance. I was grabbing a few things for the road. My own plan to get out of town was already in motion, and there she was, at the other end of the aisle, standing in front of a shelf of canned food, staring blankly at the rows of labels. She looked thinner, worn down, her once perfectly styled hair a messy tangle. I should have walked away. That's what any sane person would have done. But something in me froze, compelled to watch her. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me that still wanted to feel something. Anything. Jennifer didn't see me at first, but when she did, her eyes widened, her face draining of color. She looked around as if to make sure she wasn't hallucinating, as if she couldn't believe I was standing there, in front of her, after I'd so thoroughly disappeared from her life. "David," she croaked, her voice hoarse and brittle, like she hadn't used it in days. I didn't respond right away. My mouth felt dry. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, the moment where I'd see her again, where she'd have to face me knowing everything she'd done. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a funeral. "You look different," she said, trying to force a smile, but it faltered. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the floor. I, I didn't think I'd see you again." "I didn't plan on it," I said flatly, keeping my voice neutral. She shifted uncomfortably, her fingers playing with the sleeve of her coat, the same coat I'd bought her last Christmas. It looked out of place now, too expensive for the person she'd become. "I lost everything, David," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have nothing left." Her words should have hit me like a fist, should have given me that final sense of closure I'd been searching for. But they didn't. All I felt was a hollow ache in my chest, a gnawing sense of disappointment. "I know," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. "That was the point." She flinched at that, her face crumbling. "I'm sorry," she said again, just like she had that day on the phone, her voice cracking with emotion. I, I didn't mean for things to end this way." It was always the same with her, always pretending she hadn't meant for things to go this far. But she had. She'd made her choices. She'd left me for him. She'd lied, cheated, and now she had to live with the consequences. "You never mean anything, Jennifer," I said, my voice heavy with finality. "That's your problem." Her eyes glistened, but I turned away before I could see the tears fall. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore, not because I hated her. That would have been easy. No, it was because she'd become something I didn't recognize. And in a way, so had I. I left the store without another word, the weight of the encounter pressing down on me like a stone. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt like I'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like defeat. I went back to my motel room, packed my bags, and left the town I'd called home for the last 11 years without looking back. There was nothing left for me there, not anymore. I'd sold everything, erased every trace of the life I'd built with Jennifer. I'd gotten my revenge, but in the process, I'd burned down everything that had once mattered to me. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about her, wondering if she was still trying to piece her life back together or if she'd given up completely. I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. But the thoughts lingered, gnawing at me like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. Weeks passed. I rented a small cabin in the mountains, far away from anyone who knew me. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where you could disappear completely, but I couldn't escape the silence. It followed me everywhere, creeping into my thoughts, reminding me of the emptiness I'd left behind. I tried to tell myself that I'd done the right thing, that Jennifer had deserved every bit of it. But the more I repeated it, the less I believed it. Because the truth was, I hadn't just destroyed her life. I destroyed my own. There were nights when I lay awake in that cabin, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about the man I used to be, the man who'd believed in love, in trust, in loyalty. That man was gone now, buried beneath the wreckage of what Jennifer had done to me. But I wasn't just a victim. I'd become something else entirely. In taking everything from her, I'd lost something of myself too, something I couldn't get back. One night, as I sat by the window, watching the snow fall outside, I wondered if Jennifer felt the same. If she was sitting in that dingy apartment, staring at the walls, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. Part of me hoped she was. But another part of me, a part I hated to admit existed, hoped she wasn't. Because if she was, then it meant neither of us had won. Revenge had cost me more than I'd anticipated. I thought I could take back control, that I could punish her and move on. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever is. I poured myself another drink, the cold whiskey burning as it slid down my throat. The silence pressed in around me, heavier than ever. I'd gotten everything I wanted, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure it was enough. I stared out into the darkness, the snow still falling in thick, heavy flakes. Somewhere out there, Jennifer was living the life I'd left her with, broken, shattered, a shadow of what she once was. And here I was, living the life I'd chosen for myself. But the victory tasted like ash, and I wasn't sure if I could ever wash the bitterness away. I disappeared, just as I had promised myself I would. The first week after leaving town, I rented a cabin out in a place no one could find me. A small, sleepy town with no connection to my old life. I'd chosen it because it was forgettable, tucked away in the folds of the mountains where strangers didn't ask questions. I wanted anonymity, isolation, a place where I could fade into the background. I went by a new name now. It didn't take long to create a new identity. It was disturbingly easy, in fact. A few fake documents, a cash transaction here and there, and I was someone else entirely. The man who had been David Harding ceased to exist. I thought this would bring me some peace, that starting fresh would mean leaving behind everything Jennifer had taken from me. But each night, as I lay awake staring at the darkened ceiling of the cabin, her betrayal replayed itself in my mind. The images were vivid, relentless. I saw her with Brandon, laughing in the sun, spending my money on her fantasy life. I pictured them on that beach, their bodies tangled in a way that made my stomach twist. I had destroyed her, but the wreckage of what she'd done to me still lingered, clinging to my skin like a stain I couldn't wash off. Some nights I'd drink. Whiskey was my companion now, its burn a temporary escape from the endless loop of thoughts. But even the alcohol didn't drown out the memories. It only made them louder, sharper, turning every moment of our 8 years together into a twisted knot of love and hate. I tried telling myself I didn't miss her, that I only missed the life I thought we had. But that was a lie. A part of me, as much as I hated it, still felt something for her. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the remnants of the man I used to be, the one who believed in her, in us. I didn't regret what I'd done to her. I couldn't. I'd taken back control, pulled the rug out from under her the way she had with me. But the cost was higher than I had anticipated. Each day in that cabin felt like a slow descent into something I couldn't name. Emptiness, maybe. Or maybe it was a kind of death, the death of who I'd been, of everything I'd thought I wanted. One morning, I woke up with the faint smell of her perfume in my mind. It was one of those sensory memories that creeps in when you're least expecting it. I hadn't thought of that perfume in months, but there it was, as if she just walked past me. I sat up in bed, my chest tight, my hands gripping the sheets. Even out here, miles away from her, she still had a hold on me. That's when I realized that revenge doesn't free you. It shackles you to the past in a way nothing else can. I'd thought that taking everything from her would release me from the pain, that I could finally move on. But all it had done was tether me to her, to what we'd been, to what we'd lost. I wasn't David Harding anymore, but I wasn't anyone else either. I was stuck in between, a ghost of the man I'd once been, haunted by what I had done. Days turned into weeks. I wandered through the woods surrounding the cabin, hoping the silence of nature would drown out my thoughts. I avoided people, stayed off the grid, just as I'd planned. But the isolation, the quiet, it didn't heal me. It magnified everything I had been trying to escape. Without the noise of daily life, without the distractions of work, I was left alone with my thoughts, and they were suffocating. I kept thinking about the last time I saw Jennifer. Her face in that grocery store, the hollow look in her eyes when she said she'd lost everything. At the time, I hadn't felt anything but cold satisfaction. But now that moment gnawed at me. I replayed the conversation over and over, her broken voice, her desperate apology. She had been weak, fragile, a shell of the woman I'd once loved, and it had been my doing. Part of me had wanted to see her break. I thought it would make me feel powerful, like I'd finally gotten my revenge. But seeing her like that, it hadn't felt like a victory. It had felt like defeat, like we'd both lost something in the process. I wondered if she was still trying to pick up the pieces of her life, or if she'd fallen deeper into the void, like I had. A twisted part of me wanted to reach out, to see where she was, what had become of her. But I knew that would only drag me back into the mess I'd worked so hard to leave behind. Instead, I sat in that cabin, drinking my whiskey, trying to convince myself that I was free. But I wasn't. Freedom wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't the clean slate I'd imagined. Because no matter how far I ran, no matter how many names I changed, I couldn't outrun myself. I couldn't outrun the man I'd become, the man who had chosen revenge over healing, destruction over forgiveness. One night, a few months after I'd left, I found myself sitting by the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. It reminded me of the first night I'd begun to suspect Jennifer, the night I'd stared out of our bedroom window, wondering if I was imagining things. Everything had felt so uncertain then, so fragile. I'd been teetering on the edge of something I couldn't quite understand. Now, sitting in that cabin, I realized I was still teetering. The edge was just different. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I thought about what revenge had cost me. Not just Jennifer, not just our life together, but a part of myself, a part I wasn't sure I could ever get back. In trying to destroy her, I'd destroyed the best parts of myself, the parts that had once believed in love, in trust, in something better. I wasn't the man I'd been before her betrayal, but I wasn't anyone I recognized either. The snow continued to fall, thick and silent, covering the ground in a blanket of white, clean, untouched. I watched it for hours, thinking about the life I could have had if things had been different, if I had walked away instead of seeking revenge, if I had found a way to let go. But I hadn't. And now, I had to live with that. I poured another glass of whiskey, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. I'd told myself that taking everything from Jennifer would make me whole again. But it hadn't. It had only shown me how hollow I'd become. I wasn't angry anymore, not at her, not at Brandon, not at the world that had betrayed me. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something colder, something more permanent. Acceptance. I had done what I'd done. There was no going back, no undoing the choices I'd made. I had won, if you could call it that. But victory didn't taste like I thought it would. It tasted like ash. I stared down at the glass in my hand, the amber liquid catching the dim light of the room. I could keep drinking, keep numbing the pain, or I could stop. I could face the truth I'd been avoiding all these months. Revenge had changed me. It had taken something from me that I could never get back. But maybe, just maybe, it had given me something too. Clarity. I wasn't David Harding anymore. I wasn't the man I'd been before Jennifer's betrayal. But I was still here, still breathing, still alive. And that had to count for something. I set the glass down on the table, the sound of it hitting the wood sharp in the quiet room. I wasn't going to drink anymore tonight. Maybe not ever again. The snow was still falling outside, covering the world in a blanket of white. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it, letting the cold air rush over me. It was time to move on. Maybe I'd never be whole again. Maybe the damage was too deep, but I was still here. And that meant there was still a chance, no matter how small, to find something better, to be something better. I stepped outside, the snow crunching under my boots, the cold biting at my skin. The world was quiet, still, waiting. For the first time in a long time, so was I. I had won. But the price of victory was a part of me I could never get back. And maybe that was okay.